Well, thank you very much, you all, Moises, CSIS, and I'm honored to share with such remarkable guests that will speak to all of you today as well. You have to add that it was an heroic trip to come from my house to where I'm right now, because, as you said, Venezuela is in a national stoppage today, and there are barricades throughout the country, and it's very difficult to move through the city. I would start recognizing that we've lived 111 days of civil uprising that turned into an unstoppable popular movement, a true popular rebellion that's taking place throughout Venezuela as we speak. And when this protest cycle started 111 days ago, Venezuela was at the threshold of freedom. After last Sunday, July 16, we have crossed this threshold. We have crossed this line. And I believe that we are cautiously taking steps in a last phase of this struggle and this fight to bring down the dictatorship and to move ahead in a transition to democracy and peace, which will be stable and sustainable. We know, everybody know around the world, that the institutional and economic collapse in Venezuela, what we're seeing is a result of a small ruling group that has run out of options and has used fear, violence, and fraud to remain in power at any cost. And we've known for some time that the dictatorial nature of Maduro regime and the criminal nature of his fanatical entourage. What we never probably realized was the strength and the commitment of the Venezuelan people to bring down the most perverse and dangerous regime that has set place in our hemisphere and in our history. I'll start just with a few remarks on where are we standing today. Where is Venezuela today? It's well documented the degree of the humanitarian crisis that has been evolving and how it's getting worse every day that goes by. I just want to insist in one element, one indicator. The fact that the minimum wage in Venezuela today is $1.3 a day, and just to survive, a family needs over $5 a day. So it is just these two figures give us an idea of the degree of the humanitarian catastrophe that is evolving in Venezuela. On the other hand, I would like to insist in the internal security crisis that has gone out of the hands of the state security forces. The criminal gangs that were armed and organized by the regime now have taken over wide bases of cities and rural states in which the state can no longer exercise sovereignty. Third, a mafia system that has penetrated not only the government and the regime control powers, public powers, but that has been penetrating every single sector of society, the financial system, the media, industrial activities, armed forces, certainly, and even political parties. So this is a mafia state, a mafia system that has been penetrating societies and certainly are willing to maintain the status quo. On the other hand, I have to mention systematic and massive violations to human rights and how the number of political prisoners has been increasing in the last days, torture, censorship, and so on. But as I said before, and this is where I will like to make the most emphatic point, is that throughout 18 years, the Venezuelan society has resisted the advance of a totalitarian regime that has used every single method to annihilate our libertarian ideals, and that has had support from international forces and interests, because of cruel indifference in some cases, and because of unconfessable interests, and on the other hand. So how we got here, how this crisis started its detonation. Well, we've seen in the last years, and specifically in the last months, how the regime has been blocking every single institutional route. After the National Assembly was elected at the end of 2015, overcoming all obstacles and fraud, the regime ordered immediately that all its capabilities were taken away, and the next step was, as we all know, closing the route of the recall referendum. So we started this year with a realization that there was no institutional means through which the regime would allow reforms that would meant serious change in the quality of life and freedom and democracy for our country. In February, when these two rulings from the Supreme Court formally annihilated the parliament, this was certainly a tipping point that made all society realize that our only option left in order to regain democracy and freedom was to exercise our rights, constitutional rights, which is public uprising, and those are supported, as we all know, in Articles 333 and 350 of the Venezuelan Constitution. And that's how it all started. I'm not going to describe the intensity and of these protests, because they're all very well reported, fortunately, thanks to the international media and the social media. But I do want to insist in its characterization as a popular rebellion, and at least because of four of its characteristics, conditions. One, it's a nationwide movement, not as other times before in which we saw Los Andes particularly active, or the center of the country. This time is every single region in Venezuela. Second, because it's all sectors are involved. Certainly are the young students that are in front line have turned into an emblematic element of this fight, but you see their grandparents, their small brothers and sisters as well in the streets. Third, I was in the second element was regarding the generational scopes. Third, it's all the sectors that are involved nowadays. It's not only the students, it's workers, and we might have a chance to talk about the general strike that has been announced recently for next week. But you see the academy, you see the production and private sector, you see NGOs, human rights activists, you're seeing all Venezuelan society united in struggle. And finally, something that has been portrayed in the past as a weakness of our protest, which used to say that this was a middle-class movement. Now you can see behind a small or something to defend themselves as a young kid that comes from La Bombilla in Petare, a very poor household, sharing its fights arm with a young student that was abroad in the States, and without their parents knowing that he was coming back to Venezuela to fight, they shared this fight in the streets. So I insist in this because this movement is unstoppable. It has to do with hunger, true hunger of food, of medicines, but it does have to do with values and hunger for dignity and freedom. And that's what makes it so powerful. And that's why when Maduro decided to answer because the government, the regime realized what was taking place in April, they decided to move ahead with brutal repression and with the initiative of the Constituent Assembly. The reaction of Venezuelan society was not what they expected to move back, but on the contrary, to elevate and increase the degree of the strength and the pressure in our fights, and that brought as well decisions and actions that are good elements to believe that this time we are truly moving ahead in a transition to democracy. And I'm referring to the reactions of three pillars that have been sustaining the regime for many years. One is the international community, and we've seen now positions from governments across the world, and specifically in this hemisphere, that are clearly stating that it's not only a dictatorship, but a regime that needs to move out. Second, defections in individuals that have been loyal for 20 years, first to Chavez and now to Maduro. The most remarkable certainly is the Attorney General Luis Ortega Diaz. But there are many others, and information that is leaking, people who are moving back from what their positions used to be. And third, we will certainly need to talk, probably we can do that further ahead, about the position in the armed forces. And in that sense, I would have to say that one of the results, or two of the results of this absurd call for a constitutional assembly, is one, that all the democratic forces in the country have come tighter together, and second, that the fractures and divisions in what used to be this thought monolithic support to the regime is now more than evident. So now I would like to give a few reflections on what the plebiscite meant, and what it mandates from now on. At the beginning, it wasn't clear for the Venezuelan society, specifically those who are in the vanguard, in front line, what we were looking with the call of a plebiscite. Some thought that it was, we run the risk of reducing the pressure on the streets. But it was obvious that its objective was quite the contrary. It is remarkable what Venezuelan society was able to do in less than 3 weeks. I have been involved, as probably some of you know, in other citizens' movements and organization and participational processes, such as those in 2003, 2004, and so on, where tens of thousands of volunteers get involved. But believe me, this was way beyond what we've seen before. And we knew the risks of accepting this challenge, but we understood that it was something we really needed to do. It had nothing to do with counting ourselves. It's obvious that we are a white minority, and today over 90% of Venezuelans want an urgent regime change. It had to do with legitimacy. It had to do with getting together and committing each other with this last and most critical phase of fight against the regime. And we overcame all kind of objectives. We have no money, we had no security, of course, no electoral council. And that was one of the good and marvelous achievements, to prove that we don't need this kind of official support in order to make this huge participation process take place. We had no armed forces, no Plan República, and but what we did have was censorship and threats. We had only 2,030 sites where people could sign and vote, and what we saw, I have to say that I used to be always the most optimistic one in the room in terms of what our goals are. And I never, ever thought we were going to see this degree of participation. More than 7.6 million Venezuelan citizens in one day throughout the world. What we saw worldwide in 96 countries and over 700,000 Venezuelans go out simultaneously throughout the world with their co-citizens down here, and at the same time exercise the most impressive and big, massive act of civil disobedience in the history of humankind is something that changes our history and our future. And I believe Venezuela on Monday 17 woke up to another reality. And the regime knows it. And that's why we've seen these last reactions of more repression and aggression. So moving ahead, what is in front of us? This exercise of the plebiscite, as I said before, takes mandates to several sectors. One is certainly to the National Assembly in terms of moving ahead in naming the new justices of the Supreme Court, which it would take place tomorrow, and move ahead in naming the rectors of the Electoral Council, which should take place next week. On the other hand, it's a mandate to the armed forces. They better understand that they should stay on the side of the Venezuelan people, which are not going to move back. And they should lower their arms and accompany transition to democracy, which cannot be postponed. And thirdly, probably the most important message is to ourselves. And that's why we're seeing what we're seeing in the streets today. Venezuela is totally on stoppage at this point, and we realize this is an escalade that will day by day increase in its strength, and of course using constitutional and democratic methods, but that require as much pressure on the regime as it is needed for them to understand that time is over. So going forward, I just want to insist that this fight is not about the Constituent Assembly. Actually, we went out to the streets much before Maduro came out with this absurd proposal. This has to do with our right to live in freedom and peace. And we will not leave these streets and will not stop our pressure. And we demand the support of the international community at this point to move ahead in a transition, and that requires certainly the Maduro and his regime leaving power. So, for those that today speak about dialogue and negotiation with the regime, it's important to understand, for them to understand, and we certainly appreciate those who really are concerned about Venezuelan situation and its risks for the stability of the region, must understand that we will not accept any agreement other than moving ahead in a true transition. And that means getting rid of the mafias that have penetrated our society, the regime, and are certainly working hard to maintain the status quo. So I will end up saying that these are certainly the most dangerous days. Pain is profound, and we realize that as every hour passes, we will see repression taking other levels. We've seen that in the last days, as simultaneously on Monday after the plebiscite, hundreds of members of the civil and the armed force and the National Guard got into residences in Caricuao, La Candelaria, El Valle, El Paraíso, popular sectors of Caracas, in which the regime was most surprised and hurt to see hundreds and thousands come out the day before. And their reaction was to fire to them, to hit them, to get into their homes at midnight. What we've seen today is that those communities, far from being broken, have gotten stronger and are in the streets as we speak, decided to move ahead. So, as I say, these are the most dangerous days, the most obscure ones, but these are the final days of the dictatorship. And that will mean that Venezuela has to wake up and to rebuild together in a transition government and a unity government in which all sectors of society will be represented, in which the emergency will be taken care of starting with the first day, because those who are in the streets demanding Maduro to leave right now will be the next day demanding food and medicine. So we will have to bring solutions immediately to these very vulnerable sectors of society, but at the same time, we will start working, which is structural, and rebuilding our democratic institutions. And that will require huge trust and huge moral authority to address issues such as the role of the armed forces, what we're going to do with our oil industry, how can we open to the global investment and technologies, and how we will bring back trust and hope for those who have left and are deeply needed in our country will come back. And how that will happen very, very soon. We be sustainable, and in order for we can move ahead and be able to leave a legacy to the new generations, which is this would have been the last tyranny to set its foot on Venezuelan soil. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Maria Corina, for your thoughtful presentation. I think our audience here really felt the powerful of your words. And I think we're all impressed of the outcome of the referendum. This is a clear mandate, like you mentioned. This is 98% of the voters have a clear mandate. So I think the international community, and I'm glad of that, is watching closely more than ever. We have world leaders announcing a lot of strong statements. Now, Maria Corina, we don't have, unfortunately, too much time, but I will really like to ask you one question. This is a key question for all of us here in Washington and the international community, and I would just like to get your thoughts on it. We understand that resolving the crisis ultimately needs to be a Venezuelan-led effort. No? The current crisis and to rebuild Venezuela ultimately needs to be a Venezuelan-led effort by domestic Venezuelans. But what do you think the United States and the international community role should be on the current crisis, given the current circumstances? How can we, the international community from abroad, can help right now in Venezuela, not only today, but also for that rebuilding Venezuela transition that you're talking about? If you can walk us through that process, it will be very helpful.
Well, first I would say, Moises, it's certainly a Venezuelan-led process, but what's taking place in Venezuela is not only a fight of the Venezuelan people to a ruling, corrupt group of Venezuelan individuals. There are very complex and very dangerous international interests that are taking place, that have set their foot and their operations in our country. Drug cartels, mafia, and so on. So it is not true at this point that there is not an international intervention in Venezuela. The FARC, the Colombian guerrillas, and the narco-traffic network. So it is Venezuelan dramatic situation has to do with us, certainly, because every day that Maduro stays in power, there are at least 80 Venezuelans that die because of the dramatic situation. But the evolving crisis of Venezuela has direct implications for the whole region and for the security of the whole region, because a mafia state, a narco state, is in place in our country right now. So it is a problem for the region, and I would say for global institutions. Second, there is many actions that would demand for many years, and that if they had happened before, I believe we wouldn't have reached this point. Having said that, today we've seen that the United States has stated individual sanctions to over 20 individuals, civil and military. And that has had direct results, not only in those that have committed those crimes, but many that have been supported under the regime that have not committed those kind of crimes and have decided to break away from the regime because of that information coming out. So what I would demand from the international community is not only for these individual sanctions to take place, because they work, but also to explain that these are not individuals that are isolated, but it's a whole structure, a criminal structure that has taken place and control of our country, and that is the reason why they have to go, and they have to go now. So I believe that international pressure is needed more than ever. I know there is pressure to support the regime from those criminal groups. So we need the international democratic community putting more than that level of pressure for Maduro to understand that his best option or his only option is to step aside and give him certainly warranties and terms to facilitate this process. But what is absolutely unacceptable is a trade in which Venezuela has to accept a mafia state that is killing our kids and our children and our young people that are protesting in the streets because an international transaction is being accepted. That is certainly unacceptable, and Venezuelan society will not tolerate. So to answer directly your position, your question, I appreciate and I'm grateful for those countries that had recognized what happened with the plebiscite on Sunday. 12 different countries recognize it. 16 have alerted Maduro not to move ahead with the Constituent Assembly. And what I expect is that all these forces come together with the institutional offensive that's taking place these days in the National Assembly and the Attorney General, and certainly with a popular movement that will not stop but increase in the days to come.
Thank you, Maria Corina. I think you had a great point. International community should act and should act soon and should increase the pressure. I think is the right approach. Maria Corina, unfortunately, we don't have much time left, but this has been a great discussion. It's important that to recognize your leadership in Venezuela. Thank you so much. We hope next time we can host you in person here in Washington, and we hope that happens sooner rather than later. Thank you so much, Maria Corina. You're more than welcome to join us online with other participants on our website. But thank you again. Thank you for being here with us, and we're watching closely. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mulcahy. Falta poco. Falta poco. Thank you. Thank you very much.